Superhero comics are filled with some truly amazing characters, larger-than-life heroes that uplift and inspire us, terrifying villains that fascinate and astonish us. Then you have the rest, heroes and villains who go through so many damn changes so often that it's ultimately really hard to keep track of who's in the costume. That's why we have a show like this, everyone. That's why we have Secret Identity. And on today's show, we're taking a closer look at a character who, while they may not have started life as a villain per se, fate and the superhero multimedia machine have certainly pushed them in that direction as of late. I'm of course talking about Peacemaker. Now, show of hands and be honest, no judgment from me, there's probably a good chance you didn't know who Peacemaker was until the leader of the C Nation was cast as him in both the new Suicide Squad movie and the upcoming HBO Max show. Heck, chances are good you're probably more familiar with the Alan Moore character, the comedian, who, whether you knew it or not, is actually based on Peacemaker and not the other way around. What I'm trying to say is, for a long time there, no one could really blame you for not knowing who this guy was because, well, there was just no reason to. But as I'm going to attempt to explain in this video, Peacemaker has had one of the strangest, most stop-start publication histories of any comic hero ever, and that there's actually a lot more to him than just his very recognizable helmet. So the first thing you need to understand about Peacemaker is he didn't even begin life as a proper DC comic book character. He was actually a Charlton hero who only ended up getting folded into the DC universe later on in life, much like how Shazam Captain Marvel originally came from Fawcett Comics. The original Silver Age version of Peacemaker was a guy named Christopher Smith, and he hit comic shelves on November 1966, not as a main attraction, mind you, but as a backup story for the super spy thriller book simply known as Fightin' Five. Wow, you know, with such an original name like Fightin', it really is a wonder that Charlton didn't stick around and make it as a comic company. Created by Joe Gill and Pat Boyetti, Peacemaker actually had a fairly high concept of an origin for the time, mainly that Christopher Smith was a pacifist politician who was so dedicated to the cause of peace and nonviolence that he created a whole superhero persona to do battles with warlords and dictators head-on. These early stories also usually came packing a side order of Cold War-era fear and American communist paranoia because, well, that was just kind of the style at the time. So yeah, Peacemaker's essentially like if someone like Gandhi decided to fight crime at night in a mask while also doing his salt march during the day. Actually, hey, has anyone sold superhero Gandhi yet? I feel like that's a spec script I could make a lot of money off of. And before you have to say it, yes, a pacifist using violence does sound like a massive bit of hypocrisy, doesn't it? Well, don't worry, because Peacemaker actually developed a ton of different non-lethal weapons and gadgets to help him get the job done. This is actually an aspect of his character that wouldn't stick around for all that much longer, and I personally find it even more ironic when we stop and consider that a Peacemaker also just so happens to be a slang term given to the Colt Army action pistol that was standard issue for the American military back in the 1800s. And you better believe those kinds of Peacemakers were real lethal. Christopher would also just so happen to have his own version of the Wayne Foundation helping his superhero efforts and beyond. It was known as the Pax Institute. Keep that name in mind because it will actually keep coming up throughout the character's publication history. Peacemaker would ultimately receive his own solo series in 1967, but it was very short-lived, lasting only 5 issues and never fully being completed, though unfinished artwork from an unreleased 6th issue would end up leaking out online many years later. In the mid-1980s, DC Comics would absorb the defunct Charlton Comics into themselves, and in 1988, the Peacemaker would ride again in a brand new 4-issue miniseries. This would be a very different take on the Peacemaker character, one that would see him be taken down a more grim and gritty path. The miniseries was the brainchild of accomplished DC writer and future editor Paul Kupperberg, a man well known for breathing fresh life into stale characters. Kupperberg had actually reintroduced the character of Christopher Smith in Peacemaker a few years prior in the pages of his own Vigilante series, though there he was portrayed as a much more kill-crazy antagonist. Great, I mentioned Vigilante, which means I'm gonna have to do them in a video next. I don't make the rules of the show, that's just the way it goes. The miniseries would also build on several new additions to Christopher Smith's personal history, mainly that his father was an abusive man who was revealed to have actually run a Nazi death camp during World War II. This revelation was given perhaps as the ultimate reason behind Peacemaker's peace at any cost ideology. It was also implied that Smith was suffering from a kind of mental illness as well. In fact, it was around this time Peacemaker started to see haunted visions, ghosts, sometimes of the people he had killed and other times people who just happened to be around. The ghosts would criticize Christopher's actions and even offer commentary on the story itself. The idea being that all these ghosts were actually somehow housed inside of his helmet.
And I mean, the helmet's certainly big enough, am I right? Could probably get a whole Amityville Horror, maybe even a Shining in there on a good day.
This version of Christopher Smith would spend his latter days doing Black Ops missions for the Checkmate organization. It was on a mission for them Peacemaker would ultimately meet his end, attempting to crash a helicopter into a group of tanks that had been taken control of by the supervillain known as Eclipso. Now, the Peacemaker identity would end up laying dormant for a number of years until 1994, when in an issue of Justice League International, we would see a new version of Peacemaker be introduced as part of a group known as the League Busters, who, as the name might lead you to believe, were a United Nations sanctioned group put together to take down Justice League International. This Peacemaker's tenure only lasted the length of this story. They never got a real name and were never seen or referenced again after this story.
What? Sometimes I don't have a cutaway joke, sometimes I'm just here to tell you the information.
Now, Peacemaker number 3, Mitchell Black, would thankfully end up having a much more noteworthy tenure. This guy was a life-saving surgeon who saw himself recruited not by Pax Americana, instead by the government's own Peacemaker project. Why did Uncle Sam suddenly start caring about creating new Peacemakers in the year of our Lord 1999? Well, you see, when the Justice League was kidnapped by a villain called Avatar, new heroes were needed to be assembled to protect the home of the brave. The bulk of Mitchell Black's adventures actually took place in a book called, and oh my god, I love when my job lets me say stuff like this into a microphone and get paid for it, The Law, which is an acronym for, wait for it, Living Assault Weapons. Wow, that is some Resident Evil brand so bad it's good naming right there. This is also when the Peacemaker costume starts undergoing some of its biggest redesigns to date, with a lot more metal and gold going on. The helmet is also toned down considerably and is made a lot more modern and a lot less silly. In fact, the only thing that really remained consistent about Peacemaker's suit throughout the years is the bird logo. It's a dove, in case you were wondering, like the same dove that carries an olive branch, a symbol of peace, Peacemaker, you get it. As a series, The Law was short-lived, but it was notable for one other reason, mainly that Bob Layton was attempting to reunite Peacemaker with fellow old Charlton heroes like Blue Beetle, Black Canary, The Question, Judo Master, and of course Captain Atom.
So yeah, if you couldn't already tell, this book was trying to cash in on the success of Watchmen. A couple decades after the fact, I do believe this is the definition of striking while the iron is ice cold. Maybe it could have worked in some other reality, who's to say? Maybe people just prefer the pastiche versions more. Maybe the book itself wasn't that great. Maybe it was the wrong time for it. I'll let you be the judge.
After The Law, Peacemaker 3 would bum around for a little bit. Ultimately, he would end up dying in a fight with Prometheus during the big battle of Metropolis in Infinite Crisis number 7. And with that, we come to the 4th incarnation of Peacemaker, who may very well be one of the strangest incarnations overall for the mainline DC universe. This Peacemaker was once again something of a departure from the original, showing up as a mystery man and supporting character in the pages of the Jaime Reyes pre-Flashpoint Blue Beetle book from 2006 by Keith Geffen. Instead of the clean-cut Peacemakers we were used to, this guy was a big, burly, tattooed biker who lacked the very famous helmet. He also claimed both the names of Mitchell Black and Christopher Smith before eventually confirming that he was indeed a new version of the original Peacemaker after all. Fitting that Peacemaker would become a supporting character in a Blue Beetle book, given the fact that Christopher Smith and the original Blue Beetle were both Charlton heroes before they were absorbed into DC and became DC heroes. In fact, looking for the original Blue Beetle is exactly how Peacemaker ended up getting involved with Jaime Reyes in his battle against the alien conquerors known as the Reach. Hell, in one of the coolest moments of that Blue Beetle series, Peacemaker would end up cutting out an evil scarab that the Reach had put on him in a true crowning moment of badassness. This version of Christopher Smith would actually stick around for a little bit and become an unlikely mentor of sorts to the new young Blue Beetle before eventually riding off in the sunset before the book itself was untimely cancelled and before the whole DC universe got rebooted once again. And speaking of reboots, and I totally was, we come to the final mainline iteration of Peacemaker. This one graced our comic pages this year in 2021 as part of Robbie Thompson's new ongoing Suicide Squad book. It seems that during the Infinite Frontier era, Christopher Smith decided just in time for his big screen debut that he was going to join up with Amanda Waller and the Suicide Squad. He also decided that he was going to wear a suit that looks exactly like his new movie suit. Isn't it fun when that happens? For what it's worth, I thought they did actually find a fairly good justification to explain why a guy like Christopher Smith would join up with Task Force X. Basically, Peacemaker believed that Waller's ideology lined up with his own peace at any cost credo that he's been carrying around with him his whole career. This series is currently ongoing, and at the time of the recording there's only been about 5 issues, so there's not a hell of a lot to go on here. Basically, Smith is butting heads with Waller, butting heads with Superboy, while also acting as the team's brand new de facto leader. So far, the character hasn't really talked much about his pacifist roots and certainly doesn't seem to have any problem busting heads as they go, but again, like I said, the book is brand new and there's a good chance that could change. Now, while that's all for the main universe Peacemakers, I'd be remiss if I didn't include this multiversal Peacemaker as a special bonus round just for you, the fans, for watching this far in the video. You see, when Grant Morrison mapped out the DC universe in the pages of their story Multiversity, one of those Earths just so happened to be one that featured the old Charlton heroes in some very familiar roles to the ones as their stand-ins had in the famous Alan Moore comic Watchmen. The twist for this story, which was called Pax Americana, was that these events were actually happening closer to the present. We see President Harley, a man who came to political power working under George W. Bush, restart the Peacemaker program. These new peacekeepers, plural, would be the ultimate weapon in the fight against terrorism, bringing peace to America at any cost.
So yeah, it was basically living assault weapons all over again, only in 2015. And a lot better. And only for one issue, so it didn't overstay its welcome.
And so that was the story of Peacemaker, proof positive that you're never really done in the world of comic books, no matter how humble or unassuming your origin may be, because if some super nerd out there remembers who you are, or if you're even tangentially connected to a more famous, more classic story, then there's a good chance you'll never be forgotten. And hey, even if you are forgotten for decades at a time, don't worry either, because you're only one big movie or TV show away from a full-on resurgence. So then, until next time everyone, this has been Cape Joel for another episode of Secret Identity. If you enjoyed the video, it would mean the world to me if you left a like and a comment, especially if your comment is saying what other weird characters' publication history you would like to see me dive into next time on a future episode.